and his teachings resemble theirs. For he says that most human affairs are twofold, not meaning opposites reached by definition, as did the former party, but opposites by chance, as for example, white-black, sweet-bitter, good-bad, small-great. This philosopher let fall his opinions indefinitely about the rest. But the Pythagoreans declared the number of opposites and what they were. From both one may learn this much, that opposites are the first principles of things, but from the latter he may learn the number of these, and what they are, but how it is possible to bring them into relation with the causes of which we have spoken, if they have not clearly worked out. But they seem to range their elements under the category of matter, for they say that being is compounded and formed from them, and that they inhere in it. Aristotle, Metaphysics 1, 987a, 9-27, down to the Italian philosophers, and with the exception of them, the rest have spoken more reasonably about these principles, except that, as we said, they do indeed use two principles, and the one of these, whence is motion, some regard as one and others as twofold. The Pythagoreans, however, while they in similar manner assume two first principles, add this which is peculiar to themselves, that they do not think that the finite and the infinite and the one are certain other things by nature, such as fire or earth or any other such thing, but the infinite itself and unity itself are the essence of the things of which they are predicated, and so they make number the essence of all things. So they thought after this manner about them, and began to discourse and to define what being is, but they made it altogether too simple a matter, for they made their definitions superficially, and to whatever first the definition might apply. This they thought to be the essence of the matter, as if one should say that twofold and two were the same, because the twofold subsists in the two. But undoubtedly the two and the twofold are not the same, otherwise the one will be many, a consequence which even they would not draw. So much then may be learned from the earlier philosophers and from their successors. Aristotle, Metaphysics 1, 6, 987b, 10, and Plato only changed the name. For the Pythagoreans say that things exist by imitation of numbers, but Plato by sharing the nature of numbers. Aristotle, Metaphysics 1, 6, 987b, 22, but that the one is the real essence of things, and not something else with unity as an attribute, he affirms, agreeing with the Pythagoreans, and in harmony with them he affirms that numbers are the principles of being for other things, but it is peculiar to him that instead of a single infinite he posits a double infinite, an infinite of greatness and of littleness. And it is also peculiar to him that he separates numbers from things that are seen, while they say that numbers are the things themselves, and do not interpose mathematical objects between them. This separation of the one and numbers from things, in contrast with the position of the Pythagoreans, and the introduction of the ideas, are the consequence of his investigation by concepts. Aristotle, Metaphysics 1, 8, 989b, 32, 990a, 32. Those, however, who carry on their investigation with reference to all things, and divide things into what are perceived and what are not perceived by sense, evidently examine both classes, so one must delay a little longer over what they say. They speak correctly and incorrectly in reference to the questions now before us. Now those who are called Pythagoreans use principles and elements yet stranger than those of the physicists, in that they do not take them from the sphere of sense, for mathematical objects are without motion, except in the case of astronomy. Still they discourse about everything in nature and study it. They construct the heaven, they observe what happens in its parts, and their states and motions. They apply to these their first principles and causes, as though they agreed entirely with the other physicists that being is only what is perceptible, and what that which is called heaven includes. But their causes and first principles, they say, are such as to lead up to the higher parts of reality, and are in harmony with this rather than with the doctrines of nature. In what manner motion will take place when finite and infinite, odd and even, are the only underlying realities, they do not say, nor how it is possible for genesis and destruction to take place without motion and change, or for the heavenly bodies to revolve. Further, if one grant to them that greatness arises from these principles, or if this could be proved nevertheless, how will it be that some bodies are light and some heavy? For their postulates and statements apply no more to mathematical objects than to things of sense. Accordingly, they have said nothing at all about fire or earth or any such objects, because I think they have no distinctive doctrine about things of sense. Further, how is it necessary to assume that number and states of number are the causes of what is in the heavens, and what is taking place there from the beginning and now, and that there is no other number than that out of which the world is composed, For when opinion and opportune time are at a certain point in the heavens, and a little further up or down are injustice and judgment or a mixture of them, and they bring forward as proof that each one of these is number, and the result then is that at this place there is already a multitude of compounded quantities, because those states of number have each their place, is this number in heaven the same, which it is necessary to assume that each of these things is, or is it something different? Plato says it is different. Still he thinks that both these things and the causes of them are numbers, but the one class are ideal causes, and the others are sense causes. Aristotle, Metaphysics 2.1, 996a4. And the most difficult and perplexing question of all is whether unity and being are not, as Plato and the Pythagoreans say, something different from things, but their very essence, or whether the underlying substance is something different. Friendship, as Empedocles says, or as another says, fire or water or air. Aristotle, Metaphysics 2.4, 1001, a9. Plato and the Pythagoreans assert that neither being nor yet unity is something different from things, but that it is the very nature of them, as though essence itself consisted in unity and existence. Aristotle, Metaphysics 2, 1036b, 17. So it turns out that many things of which the forms appear different have one form, as the Pythagoreans discovered, and one can say that there is one form for everything, and the others are not forms, and thus all things will be one. Aristotle, Metaphysics 9.2, 1053, b11. Whether the one itself is a sort of essence, as first the Pythagoreans and later Plato affirmed. Aristotle, Metaphysics 11.7, 1072, b31. And they are wrong who assume, as do the Pythagoreans and Speusippus, that the most beautiful and the best is not in the first principle, because the first principles of plants and animals are indeed causes, for that which is beautiful and perfect is in what comes from these first principles. Aristotle, Metaphysics 12.4, 1078, b21. The Pythagoreans, before Democritus, only defined a few things, the concepts of which they reduced to numbers, as for instance opportunity or justice or marriage. Aristotle, Metaphysics 12.6, 1080, b16. The Pythagoreans say that there is but one number, the mathematical, but things of sense are not separated from this, for they are composed of it. Indeed, they construct the whole heaven out of numbers, but not out of unit numbers, for they assume that the unities have quantity. But how the first unity was so constituted as to have quantity, they seem at a loss to say. All as many as regard the one as the element and first principle of things, except the Pythagoreans, assert that numbers are based on the unit, but the Pythagoreans assert, as has been remarked, that numbers have quantity. Aristotle, Metaphysics 12.8, 1083, b9. The Pythagorean standpoint has on the one hand fewer difficulties than those that have been discussed, but it has new difficulties of its own. The fact that they do not regard numbers separate removes many of the contradictions, but it is impossible that bodies should consist of numbers, and that this number should be mathematical. Nor is it true that indivisible elements have quantity, but granted that they have this quality of indivisibility, the units have no quantity, for how can quantity be composed of indivisible elements? But arithmetical number consists of units. But these say that things are number. At least they adapt their speculations to such bodies as consist of elements which are numbers. Aristotle, Metaphysics 13.3, 1090, a20. On the other hand, the Pythagoreans, because they see many qualities of numbers in bodies perceived by sense, regard objects as numbers, not as separate numbers, but as derived from numbers. And why? Because the qualities of numbers exist in harmony both in the heaven and in many other things. But for those who hold that number is mathematical only, it is impossible on the basis of their hypothesis to say any such thing. And it has already been remarked that there can be no science of these numbers. But we say as above that there is a science of numbers. Evidently the mathematical does not exist apart by itself, for in that case its qualities could not exist in bodies. In such a matter the Pythagoreans are restrained by nothing. When, however, they construct out of numbers physical bodies out of numbers that have neither weight nor lightness, bodies that have weight and lightness, they seem to be speaking about another heaven and other bodies than those perceived by sense. Aristotle, Ethics 1.4, 1096 b5, and the Pythagoreans seem to speak more persuasively about it. putting the unity in the coordination of good things. Aristotle, Ethics, 2:5.